So, I was asked by the lovely people from the Bioshock Facebook page to show how I made my custom hand-painted shrink plastic charms. So, I've put together this video to explain how I make them start to finish. First, let me start with the materials. Before I get any supplies together, well, besides right now, I go on the internet and find pictures and take them into Photoshop and print them out. And I have to get the size right because I have to take into account how much it's going to shrink and how much detail it is. So once that's all done, I print it out onto a sheet like this. Now with this, I can talk about the other supplies. First off is the plastic itself. This is a clear shrink plastic, and I like to use the clear ones so I can put it right up on over top, and it just makes life a lot easier. And then I have my paintbrushes. There's one for big spots of color. This one could be used for finer details, and this one I use for like a black outline. And I have my paints. They have to be water-based acrylic paints because the other type of paints won't work. And I also have water and paper towel to clean off and dry off my paint brushes. A hole punch to punch holes, obviously. And a flat spatula, which I'll use later. Another one of my tools I will use later. It's called a Chiselet, and it's a little motorized grinding tool. And I use this to smooth out the edges. You don't have to use this. You can use nail file or some sandpaper. So, shut up, phone. So now, oh, you also need an oven. I use a toaster oven, a cookie sheet, and some aluminum foil. So now I'll start with the process. So I'm going to place this on the table and place this over top, lining it up. I'm going to work on this Booker DeWitt one. And I start with my big brush, and I take my paint, and I use this large brush and paint right onto the shrink plastic. I like to try to keep the paint nice and thin. That way it won't ruin the design when I shrink it. So I went ahead and did everything, and I also looked closely and see if there's any spots I need to fill using my medium brush. So now that everything's filled in, I'm going to take my very, very fine brush and I'm going to make the outlines. And this one you have to keep very, very thin, because if it's thick, it will mess up the design, and that's not good. So I just gently, and sometimes my brush doesn't want to cooperate with me. So. It's deciding not to cooperate with me today. Usually it works. Sometimes it doesn't feel like working. So I just use it to make black lines. Alright, so now it is completely colored in, and I went back in and I filled in some areas that didn't quite get filled out right. So now I'm going to let it dry for a little bit, and I get my scissors ready. And it won't take that long to dry because I kept the paint really thin. So then now I just cut it out. And I like to do rounded corners because later on when I go to smooth the edges, it makes it a lot easier to smooth out the edges because there's no pointy corners. just cut it out like that. Now, this step is really important. You have to hole punch it before you put it in the oven. If not, you won't be able to put a hole in it because it'll be about twice as thick. So it's simple, it's just having a hole punch. So now it's ready and I can put it in the oven. Alright, so here's my toaster oven, and I have it on a foil lined baking sheet because I don't want anything on the baking sheet to stick to the charm while it's shrinking. And I'll stick it in, and I always use a temperature lower than what's recommended because it'll slow down the shrinking time and it'll make it so that the shrinking doesn't stick to itself. So I'll turn on my oven and zoom in. So what it's going to do is it's going to heat up and it's going to start to curl up, which is completely normal. And then it's going to flatten back out. And as it's shrinking, it's going to be double its size. It's going to be really hard, which is good for jewelry.
Did you take the hand cuts off that guy first?
So it's going to flatten completely. And after that, I'm going to count to 30. And that's to make sure that the charm has completely gone through the process. But you don't have to sit. Alright, so I am going to take it out of the oven. And while they're hot, they are completely malleable, so you can bend it. So I use this time. I use my spatula to just press it down to make sure it's nice and flat. And that's it. Now, I just let it cool, and so it won't be hot. And then I'll smooth out the edges. Alright, now with the charm cooled, I'm going to grind on the edges and make sure that they're smooth. So I'm going to use my little tool, and the same principle applies with sandpaper and nail file. You start with the largest grain first. And what that's going to do is it's going to shape the edges. And it's going to shape the edges, but it's still going to be really rough. And I just do that until I get all the way around the charm. Alright, so I went through and grinded the whole thing. And now I have the next largest. And this is going to start smoothing it out. But it's also still going to kind of shape it a bit. But not as much as the one before. And so I'm just going to, again, go along the edges. Alright, so I just got done with that tool. And now I'll use the finest grain, or I call it the buffing wheel. And again, I'm just going to go along the edges. And this one is it's not going to shape it anymore. It's just going to make it really smooth. So just turn it on. You just go along the edges and it makes it nice and smooth. Alright, so I just finished grinding on with the last tool. And now I'm going to use this brush tool. This is just to dust it off. And it will also pick up some plastic pieces the other tools didn't pick up. And I'll just quickly go along the edges.
That's so dumb. Yeah, they say
It doesn't take long. And there.
I'd say
And now I have a completed charm. With the hole, I can put a jump ring on it and put it on a chain. But that is how I make a charm, and thank you for watching.